Hello and welcome to the August 18th edition of the DRF Players Podcast. I'm Mike Hogan, joined remotely just by Mr. Peter Thomas Fornatel. Welcome, Pete.
Welcome, sir. You've been doing such a great job hosting the show, and I believe, and I don't want to jinx it, but I believe some of the technology issues that have been plaguing me this summer will hopefully be solved, and I can return to being a regular guest on the show. I've missed being on terribly, and it's been all the more difficult to not be on because it seems like every day down at the Paddock Bar, I run into some individual or individuals who keep coming up and saying, wow, you guys are doing a great job on the podcast. And meanwhile, I'm thinking to myself, I'm letting down the team. But the fact is, we've had such great guests and you've done such a good job hosting. I don't think we've missed a beat.
That's great. Well, thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, my fingers are crossed that the technical issues are generally in the past. We had a little glitch there when you were talking, but it seemed to fix itself. So I'm going to cross fingers. I'm going to knock wood. I'm going to do all those little superstitious things to hope that we have all of those behind us. And, you know, it's kind of sad that I'm not able to make it up to Saratoga, at least probably not this year, because even though you've got people coming up to you at the Paddock Bar, I got people reaching out to me on Twitter saying, when are you here? I want to buy you a drink. And
that's what happens when you keep picking all these winners for the folks out there, including on last week's pod with Grand Arch. It was actually a funny story. A great friend of mine and listener of the podcast, Tim McDonough, had a friend coming up to the races on Saturday. And the friend, as friends do, who are to non-racetrack friends to racetrack friends, the friend was asking for a tip. And having just listened to the show, he said, oh, yeah, Mike Hogan, who's pretty good, says you should bet Grand Arch in the 4-star Dave. And so now my buddy Tim looks like a genius. So that's good. And so do you.
Hey, well, you know, I'm always glad to help. And it's nice when in the rare instances where I actually see a race playing out and it plays out exactly how I scripted it on paper. I could probably count on one hand the number of times that's happened. But we'll get to that race in a little bit. Maybe we'll go over all the racing at Arlington. And I know that there was a big contest that featured the Arlington races that our buddy Jonathon Kinchen was able to absolutely just demolish this weekend. So there's a lot of good stuff to talk about around those races, and there's a lot of good stuff to talk about at Saratoga too. Before we move on, I will say the flip side of me having to stay in the city and not being able to experience any of the Saratoga stuff is I get to luck into the occasional New York City experience, like seeing Stevie Wonder at the last minute last night in Central Park. So,
oh, fantastic. Where was that?
That was at Summer Stage. It was one of those, it was a crazy thing where yesterday Stevie Wonder last minute announced a show in the morning or early, I think in the morning in Washington, D.C., in the early afternoon in Philadelphia, and in the evening in Central Park. And tickets were free, and they went available at 4:30 our time. I'm sitting there hitting refresh at the site, and long story short, just lucked into some free passes. So my wife and son and I, we ended up getting to see Stevie Wonder when we had no idea earlier in the day that it was even going to be possible, let alone a reality. So
I think all in all, those are the best concert experiences, when something just totally unexpected happens like that. Yeah. And who better than Stevie Wonder? I mean, obviously he's great 12 months a year, but I think of him in the summertime in particular would be just an incredible experience. How was the set? How long did he play? Give a couple of details here.
Well, he played maybe a little over an hour with some question and answer. It was interesting. It was billed as kind of a press conference and performance. And so he played a little over an hour. He talked a lot. He talked about some of his views, certainly on gun control and things, which, you know, believe me, I'm not going to disagree with him. We won't get into it here. So he talked a little bit about that. He had some questions from press and from members of the audience. And then he just kind of, he talked a lot. It was a press conference really to promote his tour, Songs in the Key of Life tour, that ends, I think, in a couple months at Madison Square Garden, but goes all around the U.S. later, starting next month, I believe. So it was mostly a promo for that, but he played, 6 or 7 songs. He played Sir Duke. He played
awesome.
Yeah, it was awesome. Everyone was dancing. My son was running around dancing like a little crazy toddler, and it was pretty cool. It was pretty cool.
That's funny that you specifically name-checked all the songs Stevie has, that you specifically name-checked Sir Duke, which I was going to ask you about, because I have memories of being about 10 years old out on Long Island. My family used to summer in this little town called Rocky Point on the north shore of Long Island in Suffolk County. And of course, my dad, it was like one of his few weeks of vacation when he was a regular on the radio, and we would constantly have the radio on and be listening to music. And it must have been the summer that song came out, but I just have such memories of summertime and cranking that by the pool in Rocky Point. I was going to ask if you played it, and you let me know without asking. Good stuff.
There you go, yeah. So, as much as I would love to see the racing in person at Saratoga, the chance to back into a Stevie Wonder performance in Central Park for free might be enough of a reason to just kind of trump all of that and make me feel okay about staying in the city all summer.
I think in the big picture, that's not. I'm never going to say anything's a better idea than being in Saratoga, but that's a pretty fine plan B, my friend.
Yeah, for sure. All right, well, let's get to some of the racing. We had the Arlington Million, of course, on Saturday. We had a lot of other good stakes races at Arlington. 3 of them were part of the Public Handicapper contest. I didn't ask, did you get a chance to put in your picks for Public Handicapper this weekend?
I did not. I would have just broken even, so it didn't matter. I love Lucky Speed, but I don't think I would have come up with winners in any of those other races, so I would have been like plus $2 or something, so it ends up just as well. I've had a lot of trouble lately being able to get those picks in for a variety of reasons, and I'm hoping to get back on track with it. I assume you're doing pretty well now in that contest, right? Are you up above, are you back into the black on Public Handicapper?
I think I'm $1.50 under.
That counts.
I'll get a winner, and then, I'll get 3 losers. And, I mentioned 2 horses that I liked in the Beverly D, one being the Aidan O'Brien filly, and the other one being What's the Chances. I went with the Aidan O'Brien on top, What's the Chances second, so what are you going to do?
Still a very good pick. I mean, just to be able to see What's the Chances in that spot, especially before the rain came. Well, I don't know. Should we talk about that race as a whole? Where do you want to start today?
Well, let's start with the big one. Let's start with the Million, and our buddy the Pizza Man, who's now 10 for 13 on the Arlington turf.
Amazing.
Yeah, absolutely amazing. It's too bad you weren't able to be on remote, because we had a really good podcast on Friday where your buddies Chris Larmy and Scott Carson were sitting in and sharing the Skype, kind of pushing each other out of the way a little as they talked. It was awesome. And we talked about that race in detail, of course. But those guys, they sure do like to talk.
Oh yeah, they're great. They're both great handicappers and great talkers. Had the pleasure of hanging out with them a bunch at the Saratoga contest, which we'll talk about in a bit. But also, as I know they told you, we all went to dinner. We went up to Max London's the second night of the contest and had a lot of fun. The result, it wasn't as bad as those guys were making it out to be. It just wasn't the right call for me that night. I just want to throw that out there in case any of my friends from Max's are listening. It was perfectly solid.
It was a listed stakes level, not a graded stakes level.
I would concur with that.
Okay, that works.
But those guys, they can talk, and they're great guests. I'd love to do more with both of those guys. Obviously, Scott's been on several times, but Chris is one of the sharpest contest players out there. No less of an authority on contest play than Paul Sherman, who's run in the top 10, I think even the top 5 of the NHC about 3 times, says Larmy is the best contest player he's seen. And when he shows up at a contest and sees Larmy, he says to himself, he's here. So pretty good praise, and a pretty good, not just a nice guy and a good talker, a super sharp handicapping mind as well.
He absolutely is. Well, in the Arlington Million, we were all surrounding Up With the Birds, who I felt like ran a really good race. And at the top of the stretch, I could foresee a scenario where he actually made a winning move and might have held on to win. He just got overtaken late by the Pizza Man and Big Blue Kitten, who ran. They both got a 103 Beyer. Pizza Man, of course, finishing a little ahead of Big Blue Kitten. But boy, a fantastic race, and you got to love a horse like the Pizza Man. Shows up every time, especially at Arlington.
He's super cool. I think I just have chronically underrated that horse, especially on his stomping grounds, and I'm just ready to take a total mea culpa on the Pizza Man. Terrific effort. I would have been right with you guys on Up With the Birds. That would have been my top pick on Public Handicapper. I just, I loved at the price and thought there had been excuses from the previous two, and he ran okay. One horse I think you can safely take out of that race is Slumber, who encountered some real difficulty, stuck down on the inside and knocked around, and I don't think was able to show his true form. Don't think he offered any particular value in the million spot, but is the kind of horse next time that might get overlooked, and I think has an absolutely valid excuse, and you could look to for better things from Slumber going forward, I think.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. It was funny, but right before the podcast, I was talking to our friend Lonnie Goldfeder about Slumber. And follow with me for a second here. But from a betting standpoint, I compared Slumber to Bayern. Okay. And I said he's a horse that I always want to take on and try and beat at a short price. Whenever he gets bet, or whenever he's the favorite especially, he's one that either finds trouble or rarely seems to win. But when he's overlooked, when he's 14-1, when he's 11-1, when he's a good price, he's one that has to be used because he runs a race. He runs his race almost every time. And I use Bayern as the example because and I tweeted this out last night, as the favorite, he's 2 for 7. Whenever he's 7-2 or better, he's 4 for 6, and he's a huge ROI. So. Those are the kinds of things that often I think horse players, especially ones that are looking to pick winners and not necessarily looking for value, they maybe hate horses like that because when they bet them as favorites, they lose, and when they toss them as long shots, they beat them.
Yeah, that's an excellent observation. I mean, I think the specifics of the comparison are a little tricky just because I think we know and can identify the Bayern situations more readily than you can the Slumber situations. I mean, when you're getting, I don't think Slumber's a horse who necessarily creates his own trouble. I think he, this time especially, legitimately just had kind of an awful trip due to circumstances outside of his control. But I think that's a great point you make about the power of letting the odds be your guide. When you know a horse is a good horse, and you know that horse is value in a spot, that's when you want to be on, not when when they're the obvious choice and then something goes wrong and you get in trouble in your betting. And it's just a great reason why you have to do that second level research. This sounds contrary. I mean, best book about handicapping, or one of the best books I've ever read, is called Picking Winners. The irony is the game is not about picking winners. That's just one part of the equation. But the second level, the level you need to get to, is finding value. And I think you're pointing folks in the right direction when you make points like that, Mike.
Yeah. So anyway, but fair point. I hope next time he is overlooked because he's absolutely bettable when he's value. And, I think going back to when he was in Mott's barn, he was a horse I always tried to bet against because he was often the favorite and he rarely won. I think he's improved since he's gotten with Chad Brown, but I think, and I don't have his PPs in front of me, but I think off the top of my head, the only time he's won was on Belmont Day on the undercard, where he was 14-1.
I do remember him when he came back off that long layoff in Mott's barn 2 or 3 years ago. It was actually a race at Saratoga. It was a day I was sitting in the boxes. And it was one of those times, I'm pretty sure he would have been the favorite this day. It was one of those times where I just had that, I'm blown away by the physical presence of this horse on the track in front of me. Came out with the bowed neck and doing the rocking horse thing, and had a coat that was gleaming and all the muscles, shimmering. And I mean, crazy as it sounded, I said to myself at that time, this is a horse I think could be a candidate in the Breeders' Cup Turf or the Breeders' Cup Mile, or he looked like a Breeders' Cup horse that day, and he was very much on my radar as a horse to watch. But then, to show you how silly I am, over time, and the disappointments come, and the disappointments at short prices, and I end up getting off the horse. And my Belmont Day, the tale of my Belmont Day betting, I did everything to get thickly alive to American Pharaoh in that pick 4 that paid off in the Belmont. Even had I used my old friend Slumber as a C, I walk with the very hefty sum of money. But I wasn't sort of thinking, hey, here's a horse I know and I like and is going to be a big price. I was thinking, blinkers on, it's not really a move I want to see in a graded stakes. Anyway, I ended up tossing the horse, and he comes to get me. So it just sort of speaks to that same point. When they're going to be a price, especially in multi-race bets, this is what seahorses are for, friends.
Yeah.
If you're going to be right about everything else, you might as well cash when a horse who is a good horse somewhere in there comes and wins.
Yeah, no, I'm absolutely with you. Let's jump back to the Pizza Man for a second, and Big Blue Kitten as well. They both got a 103 buyer, and I'm guessing they're going to move forward and target Keeneland is it October or November? I forget.
Breeders' Cup, the turf will be run on November 1st, I think. Isn't it the 31st and the 1st this year?
Yeah,
I could be wrong about that, but around then.
I know they straddled Halloween, and I can't remember where it is. But anyway, they're both going to target the Keeneland. They're both targeting the Breeders' Cup Turf. The Pizza Man, of course, I think even in that situation will probably be a bit of a price, because some people will be thinking, this is just an Arlington horse for course. Where do you go with him next? And what do you think of him coming out of this race? Do you think he is a player on the big turf, the Breeders' Cup Turf scene, or is he strictly an Arlington horse for course?
Well, that's funny that you say that, because I just said how I've been chronically underrating it. I mean, of course, my knee reaction, knee jerk, that's the word I'm looking for, reaction, is to say, that maybe it is an Arlington thing, and the kind of field he's going to face in a race like the Breeders' Cup Turf. I guess at the end of the day, it comes down to who's going to show up. The Europeans always are going to hold a strong hand in that race if they decide to send their best. In the Million this year, this was the worst group of Europeans that I can remember coming over for this race, and it seemed very obvious to me that the Americans were going to be a handful. Is that going to be the case in the Breeders' Cup Turf? I'll tell you what, if they don't send a strong contingent, you definitely have to look at a horse like the Pizza Man, at least to include at a low level in your multis. But I'm not excited about betting him against the world's best turfers or anything like that.
Well, I look at it again, getting back to our discussion on price. If he's overlooked, or if he's a square price, this is an improving horse who has done very little wrong. Sure, the question is the surface, but if that is able to help you get a much better price on a horse who has run really well, seems to be running his best races now, why not take a shot with a horse like the Pizza Man?
Yeah, I don't have any problem with that. It's just all about what that number comes back. Not a horse who you're going to be excited about to bet at 9-2 against a couple of serious-looking runners from Europe. That's for sure. Because as we've discussed on the show before, I'm still of the opinion that while sometimes they come over here for the Breeders' Cup as an afterthought and are opposable, their best against our best, their best are going to have the upper hand 9 times out of 10, more or less.
Absolutely. Well, let's jump on to another race from Public Handicapper at Arlington this weekend, kind of a lead-in. Their best against our best in the American St. Ledger. The Europeans ran 1-2. It was won by Lucky Speed, who byred a 102, and Panama Hat finished second. And then we were back to the Americans from there. So that was a case where we talked about it a bit on the podcast. The the Larmy Carson team were both on Panama Hat, and we did talk a little bit about Lucky Speed. I was on Highball, who didn't really run a step. I think he might have had some trouble out of the gate, but wasn't my most inspired pick. Going back to it, it was really kind of as simple as the Europeans versus the Americans.
Yeah, and going that kind of distance, whatever advantage I believe that the Europeans have going 1.25 miles or 1.5 miles on the turf, you could probably take that and multiply it by about 5 when you're talking about whatever the distance of that race was. What
a mile and 11/16.
11/16. There you go. I mean, the kind of stamina that's going to be in the blood of horses who were bred in Ireland or Germany or Great Britain. It's just, there's just absolutely no comparison. So yeah, that was one of the least surprising results of the day, and I felt silly afterwards for not having that exacta, which I know one of my buddies, Dave Gutfreund, actually ended up running second in the Hawthorne contest that we're going to talk about in a little bit, just boxing that exacta. Very logical result. I know there was a lot of positive chatter around Arlington about Panama Hat. No surprise those guys landed there, but I think that's a race where you might not see a U.S.-bred winner very often. Let's just leave it at that.
Fair enough. Well, maybe let's talk about the Hawthorne contest now. As we're kind of in the middle of these Arlington races, this was a key sequence for the winner of that contest, our buddy Jonathon Kinchen. Why don't you tell a little bit about how he attacked that contest and why that contest maybe certainly allowed him to take it down and take it down as such a huge figure.
Absolutely. Well, I'll rewind first, because we got to go back to the Saratoga contest last week that both Chris and Scott were in town for. And that contest was actually won by Brett Wiener, last year's second on the NHC Tour. You mentioned Jonathon Kinchen before. Kinchen was in 9th place. And now that marked the 3rd on-site contest memory where he was in the top 10 at the end of day 1 of a 2-day contest. The other 2 being the Santa Anita contest and the Del Mar contest. Now, for folks who don't follow, he's been in this great position on the NHC Tour since the beginning of the year because he had 5 great online scores pretty much right out of the bat. But in order to win, you need to have an on-site score. You need to go to a live tournament and do well. So he had been experiencing a lot of frustration because of getting close and not quite getting there. And as we get to the end of the year, sort of the live tournament season, it's dwindling a little bit. Even though there's several months left in the year, most of the big ones have happened. So the pressure is starting to get on. And then at Saratoga, you see a guy like Brett Wiener, as serious a player as there is, a very, very good and skilled tournament player, to win a contest outright. You start thinking in the back of your head, wow, now I got this guy to worry about. So he went to Hawthorne with a lot of pressure on him. And this tournament has very unique rules. It's a live bankroll contest where you can play multi-race wagers, and that enabled him to play the pick 5. In his own cash play, more of a multi-race player, so he was very excited about this opportunity. And with the help of Ticketmaker, he went ahead. He had 2 entries in the contest, so he went ahead and used both his entries to play the pick 5. I've actually tweeted if folks want to go and check out @LoomsBoldly, you can see exactly how he used Ticketmaker to help him. And he hit this thing out of the park. Ended up in the last race having 4 different horses where he had the possibility of cashing between $18,000 and $20,000, and that's exactly what he did. He ended up with 65 times his initial bankroll, which is unheard of basically in a live bank contest. As a result, most of them don't have pick 5s, which is part of the reason why. But just an incredible performance to get the win, and he is once again in a stranglehold position atop the NHC Tour full year standings. And if you go ahead and find the article I wrote, I recommend people check it out. He's just got a really good personal story and sort of the emotional journey of traveling all summer, trying to get this on-site score, feeling like maybe it was slipping through his fingers, but then, coming out strong here in, it's not the bottom of the ninth, but, bottom of the seventh inning and putting a big score on the board. Congratulations to Jonathon Kinchen, and we got to have him on here soon, or maybe do a webinar with him soon, talking about how he uses Ticketmaker to make these big scores he's become known for.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I would love it. I think let's do both. Why not? Because I think the way he approaches it is really the kind of way you should approach it. There are a lot of people, even really good horse players and handicappers and professional bettors, who don't really believe in the ABC method because they fear it opens themselves up to having multiple tickets where they don't have the winner. So they have the winner on one ticket but not on another. I know Jonathan's approach is not that way. It's more to include horses that you normally would throw out. And I think that is the key. It's not about saving money in your original budget. It's more about using your budget to expand your ticket, to catch those horses. Because I know he had a horse, I think What's the Chances was only a B for him.
That's exactly right. He said he only included Stephanie's Kitten and What's the Chances because out of respect to Chad Brown. That was the line he used. Yeah. But because he had AAA going into that race, then he had all his A's and B's for the next two races. Pizza Man also was only a B horse for him. But the other great thing about Ticketmaker is the way that it teaches you to weight the combinations. So he liked Big Blue Kitten more, so he had that one for $1.50. He liked Slumber more, so he had that one for $1.50. Only 50 cents of the Pizza Man, but because he paid so well, ends up winning the same amount of money. It's really an ingenious way to construct your tickets, and especially big bettors shouldn't really be worried about that idea of not being able to include all the horses, because you can always play it for 50 cents with all your A's and B's in every leg, and then use it to weight the combinations you like more, so you have a chance to get paid when your strongest opinions win. There's a way to use that program for everybody, and you don't need to just stick by exactly what the computer spits out at you. You can do a combination approach where you use Ticketmaker and then use your own ticket writing savvy to press certain combinations, etc. I mean, I just don't think there's any reason not to use it, and I feel like if you're playing multi-race bets and you're not using it, I honestly don't see how you win. Unless you can do that stuff in your head, I don't see how you win at the end of the year in your multi-race bets, unless you just get lucky with a big score or two.
Yeah, no, it's a fair point, and I would love to have him on to talk about it. And let's set it up. Let's do a webinar.
I love it. We'll get it teed up. Maybe he's a possible guest for the. Mike, you said you might not be available for Friday. I don't know technology-wise how we can set this up, but he could be a possible guest for Friday as well. Get him to come on here and yap about that a little bit. We'll do a little preview on the DRF Players Pod and then expand it fully in a webinar soon.
I like it. I like it. All right, well, let's move on to the Beverly D. We're kind of jumping around in order, but that's okay. The Beverly D was maybe certainly the most controversial of the races over the weekend.
Was it?
Secret Gesture crossed the finish line well ahead to the point where she got a 98 buyer. What's the Chances got a 95 buyer. But What's the Chances was elevated on the DQ of Secret Gesture. And I don't know, your take on it. I can give my take first. I want to hear yours because I'm thinking we're probably about similar.
Well, you know what? To be honest with you, this is one that I can almost argue either side of. I think the general idea is very much like the instance we saw earlier we talked about earlier in the Saratoga meet in that juvenile race where you had a horse who was a clear winner, who I also felt, according to the rules, clearly had done enough to cost another horse a placing. Yes. And therefore, I agreed with the decision. This one, to me, it's very similar. If anything, even more controversial, though, because of this notion. I don't know if you've seen any of these quotes, but I mean, Jamie Spencer has gone on record, and his exact quote is, Erod Ortiz took a dive. That he really sold and exaggerated what happened during the race. Now, I need to watch the head-on of the end of this race several more times before I really choose a side here. But there is a logic to it, especially when you consider that Erod Ortiz is riding for the same trainer of the horse that ended up, getting put up? Is it possible Erod Ortiz was conscious of the fact that if he sold this, the contact or the drifting, whatever you want to call it, of Secret Gesture, that the guy he was riding for, Chad Brown's horse, would get put up? I think very clearly if Stephanie's Kitten runs second in this race, there's no change in the order of finish. So there's a lot of drama and a lot of craziness at play here. I understand the decision, but I also understand the controversy, and I'm not willing to really cast my lot wholly in one way or another. Where do you land on this?
Yeah, well, I think your analogy to the race where Magnalite was DQ'd at Saratoga is incredibly apt. I think had Stephanie's Kitten stayed on and not got beaten, what was it, a head or a neck or whatever it was for second, there's no change. Because there is no way, I don't think in anyone's assessment, that Secret Gesture was going to finish behind Stephanie's Kitten. That the incident and any of that, there was no way Stephanie's Kitten was going to get, especially as late as it happened, get to a point where she finished ahead of Secret Gesture. So the whole DQ hinges on what's the chances getting up for second over Stephanie's Kitten, and thereby costing a placing. So there's a couple things that I think about that. I don't know, and I'm certainly not going to speak whether or not Erod Ortiz took a dive, oversold it. I think your point is an interesting one, although it would be an amazing amount of mental dexterity to, within those split seconds, realize the horse that's coming up from behind is his stablemates, and maybe if I do this, then we'll get that. That's in a split second. That's a big decision to make and be able to carry out, and if you're acting, be able to act it out in such a way that is convincing enough to the steward. So I would be surprised if that happened. If so, that's an amazing job by Erod Ortiz.
Jamie Spencer's convinced. Jamie Spencer's absolutely convinced.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of people that were convinced that there were multiple shooters on the grassy knoll as well, but that doesn't mean that that doesn't mean that's true. There's a lot of people that are convinced that we never landed on the moon.
That's a whole different podcast. We'll do our conspiracy theory podcast someday.
Yes.
I'll bust out my tinfoil hat instead of my fedora.
There you go. I love it. I love it. However, the other thing that's controversial about it, 10, 20 years ago, had this race been run in at Arlington, okay, Stephanie's Kitten, what's the chances, are a coupled entry.
That's true, too.
And if your theory is, hey, I might not be able to win this race, but I can help my stablemate win this race if I do a little bit of this, okay? To me, yet another reason for going back to the couple. I know that the zeitgeist amongst horse players is remove the entry coupling because I want one horse maybe and not the other. I'm not so sure about that for a number of reasons. And
you've mentioned that opinion before, and maybe this is I don't know how much time we have left today, but maybe this is as good a time as any to talk about that. I mean, I just think I get what you're saying in theory, but I think in the big picture of life, it's fanciful, because the fact is that when you're coupling entries, you're costing the industry a heck of a lot of money, because the more betting interest you have, the more money you make. It's very simple. The economics of it are cut and dried.
Fair
and
enough.
when we have a world in which, as we saw several years ago up here now, a couple of years ago here now, where I can't remember what the race was. Maybe it was the Curlin. It was a race like that, where you had a Godolphin entry, and one in the entry was disqualified, and the other one was elevated. Mm-hmm. Like, to me, if you're going to treat it that way, so with a sort of a conspiratorial mindset, if one horse gets DQ'd, then both horses should get DQ'd. Sure. And once they failed to do that in that race, it became very clear to me that entries just needed to go. That they just that they didn't make any sense in the modern horse playing world, and that's sort of the way that I feel. I don't think that whatever limited whatever limited use they have warrants all the money that you lose as a result of them from a handle perspective.
Here's my other case for coupled entries. And again, looking ahead into the modern world of horse playing, I know that there are a lot, myself included, a lot of horse players that would love to see something in North America like the exchange wagering that they have over in Europe. And if there is, even legislatively or however you want to say it, if there is a perception of some chicanery and you have coupled entries, perhaps that opens the door and makes it a little easier, because you have cases like this where if they're the same owner or the same barn and you know that one is, the goal is to finish ahead of the other and the rabbit is in the race to help set it up for another, doesn't coupling of entries make it a little bit easier to get something like exchange wagering passed over here?
I don't think so. I mean, there's no coupled entries in the countries right now where exchange wagering happens. I think the fears about exchange wagering leading to more chicanery are unfounded. I mean, to me, having talked to a lot of professional bettors and over the years, the trifecta is a much better opportunity for chicanery than exchange wagering is. If you can tell a professional bettor, somebody who really understands how to get their money in the pools, that a certain favorite isn't going to be on the board, there's an opportunity in a pool like the trifecta to make a major score without leaving any footprints. The thing about exchange wagering is the money is going to leave footprints. Yeah.
Well,
I suppose on a low level, somebody might be able to pull horses and this and that and bet in the exchange in a way that it's not going to be seen. But to me, the far greater opportunities for scores that are sort of nefarious coming from exotic betting, not from exchange betting. And at least in the exchange pools, you leave footprints. And I think if these kind of things were to happen, whether it was with coupled entries or however it is, you're going to be able to see it the same way they've been able to ferret out nefarious business in tennis matches with players dumping matches and them leaving huge footprints in the pools. So I'm not so concerned about that, but it is interesting and worthy for further discussion.
Well, the problem is you're talking logically here. And with our legislators, it's less about logic and more about perception in many cases, because these are not knowledgeable horse players. These are not knowledgeable. They get briefed for 10 minutes. And so for me, it's more about the perception of chicanery rather than the actual footprints or things. I just think if there is outside of the industry a perception of there's a lot of nefarious dealings going on, to me, reinstituting something like coupled entries will help address that and potentially push something like exchange wagering through. Anyway, that's sort of my thought.
It's an interesting point. It's an interesting point, and I think you're right. I think the perception of these problems is part of the reason why this hasn't happened and won't happen. And I don't know that the reinstituting the coupled entries would be enough to change that perception. And meanwhile, another part of the problem is horsemen being terrified of new things, not really understanding what's going on the exchange side. And now you're telling them to get this thing that they already don't really understand or want, we're going to decrease the handle in the multi-race wagers that they know they're getting money from. I don't see it happening.
Okay. Well, fair enough. All right. That was an interesting discussion that I hadn't really even planned on talking about. I hadn't even thought about it until you brought up the whole Jamie Spencer conspiracy theory. So I'm sure we'll have time to talk about this in greater depth at some other point. Let's move over to Saratoga now. We tipped a little bit about the 4-star Dave. Grand Arch won. He bayed a 102. As I said, it's very rare that a race actually works out the way I kind of scripted it on paper. I thought King Creesa was a good horse who was improving, but I thought his better races were going one turn. He certainly runs well at 2 turns. He ran a good, finished 4th, but I thought he was at his best at 1 turn. I thought he would get pressed by Skyring, and I thought a horse like Grand Arch, who is better going a 2-turn mile. I thought he ran a good race last time. Wanted an extra turn that he would get at Saratoga, and I thought he would get first run on the later closers, which is kind of what ended up happening. I think Ironicus ran a fantastic race. He might be the one I would want out of the race, although I think he might want a hint further than a flat mile. You know, sometimes they run the races the way you script them on paper, but it's very rare.
It's wonderful when that does happen. And I think you nailed it when you say that he just got first run in a perfect trip, Grand Arch. I thought Ironicus was the best horse in the race. I mean,
yep.
To be that wide, to move that early, I mean, I felt like kind of everything went wrong. I worry that that might even be international bad trip horse territory, where wherever he runs next, he's going to be absolutely hammered by everybody who watched that race. That would be my fear. But that's a serious racehorse, man.
He will. He will. You know, I mean, even coming into this field, which I thought was a pretty salty field, he'd only had the one graded stakes effort, you know, and he was bet pretty hard off of it. You know, he's a horse that is relatively lightly raced. He hasn't been exposed like some of the others. You know, Seek Again, I think, ran a really good race, but his best race of his career might have been a year ago in the 4-star, Dave. And I think he's still trying to recapture that, you know, that effort and that glory. There's been a few others, you know, Skyring and even horses like Jack Milton who have been a little bit exposed. Ironicus is one that hasn't been, and I think he's still got a bit of upside, which is why, aside from the trip, I think he's one that's going to be continued to get bet next time.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. Seek Again, I'm glad you mentioned. I mean, I think I'm stealing this observation from somebody else I was hanging out with. I wish I could give credit. But doesn't he just seem at this point, he's the kind of horse who actually, he just runs really well with cover. And does almost his best work when he's in danger of getting in super serious trouble, as he was last year in that race when he made that spectacular move under, I guess it was Rosario, to split and get up in that race. He's a horse who's going to give you agita when you bet him, but he's very very talented. And when you get the right number on him, I'd go back to that well. Also. He's a very cool horse.
Absolutely, absolutely. And, you know, even a horse like Mishuish, who might have needed a race and looked like he was a bit of a danger at the top of the stretch before kind of tiring, he's one that can move forward off of that and certainly can be a big player going forward. And probably, I would imagine, we'll see him, if he stays on target, we'll see him at the Breeders' Cup in the mile.
Yeah, I feel bad saying this, admitting this, I should say, but I need to watch that replay a few more times. I think there might be a few other things to take out of it. Those were sort of the things I saw as it was going on, but were there a few more hours in the day up here?
Yeah, well, I understand, Pete. I understand.
I've spent some more time looking at that tape, and I subsequently will before they run again. Yeah.
So you had said before we got on you were going to tell some stories about some other Saratoga experiences. We have a few minutes. Do you want to dive in?
Yeah, I was just you know, I'm having one of these meets I've mentioned on here before. I came into this meet with the idea that I was going to try to make it easy for myself. We talked about the idea of just looking at the pick 4 races. And I've come to the conclusion in the first 3 weeks I'm here that this is something that's going to sound obvious to people listening, but maybe it bears repeating. You can't do what I tried to do coming into this meet. You can't cut down on the work and try to make it easy for yourself, because what I've realized is then not only do you miss opportunities in the other races, but you kind of feel obligated to play the races you're looking at. And so I feel like, I mean, granted, I also feel like I've been unlucky, but I just wanted to pass that idea along that you can't, there's no substitute for doing all the work and then betting where the opportunities are. You can't say, I'm going to just try to find my opportunities in these races. I mean, maybe you can do that and then have a whole lot of days where you're just passing everything. But from here on out in the meet, I'm going to sort of go back to my older approach, which I think is the only approach of look at everything, try to find the spots of interest, and then bet only when they're value. And that's harder to do. It's nice to say, hey, I'm going to handicap this pick 4 and play it, or pass it. But I find more often than not, I like the action a little too much. If I'm doing those 4 races, I'm gonna get drawn in. So I'm sort of going back to basics here, and I'm gonna play pick 4s or pick 5s when I have 2 to 3 strong opinions. And other than that, I'm just going to be looking to go back to basics and bet win and place in the 2 or 3, whatever they happen to be, best opportunities of the day. I reversed yesterday, had my sort of first good day, properly good day of the meet betting-wise, and I'm feeling confident that the hole I'm in from these first 3 weeks isn't big enough that I can't get out if I just go back to basics and then take a couple of swings where warranted.
No, I like it. That's very smart. That's very smart.
Before the end of the meet, I think I was I was naive. I was naive in the kinds of stuff I was saying coming into the meet. I think the game is just too hard to work that way, and I'm hoping that that I can continue to keep things rocking and rolling with this approach and have a score or two, but also just grind a little bit more. I mean, it's been a humbling few weeks, but I feel like I'm on the path to getting things back rocking and rolling. How have you been doing in your own wagers?
I've been doing okay. I actually haven't been playing a whole lot. I was at Coney Island on Saturday. My family was in from out of town. I didn't even bet a single dime at Saratoga, so I didn't even take advantage. I didn't even take advantage of my Grand Arch opinion.
Oh, that's tragic.
That's okay. We had a good day, and we were running around with the so. I've kind of just been I've been picking my spots here and there, doing okay, but nothing really noteworthy on the plus or minus side. So, but that's okay. That's okay. This summer has been more about, especially on the weekends, spending it more with family. So,
well, there's nothing wrong with that. That's for sure. That was one of the great quotes that Kinchen had in that article I was talking about before. Was he'd done the math and something like 26 of the last 30 days he'd spent away from home. And as that pressure was mounting, as he was looking for that on-site score, he started to think to himself, like, man, I really need to get a result here because otherwise all this time away from my family isn't going to be worth it. So he was actually emotional talking to me about it. And this was actually before the Million. We spoke on the phone between the Beverly D and the Million, and he was telling me the numbers that he had so I could follow along, and with a voice with a lot of emotion, and it said, I just want one of these things to win, so being away from my wife and son for this long is worth it. It's kind of a great little subplot and a good point. And sometimes as horse players, we have to understand where our priorities are, and that's not, believe it or not, it's not always at the racetrack. Of course, I'd say to you can always bet Grand Arch in the morning before you go out on your DRF Bets account.
That is true. That is true. I could have and should have. I guess I could do the conditional wagers where if in a world where he's bet down to 4-1 and I feel like he's not value, I don't actually place the bet. But I figured he'd be a square price just because it was a pretty salty field. The other thing, the other frustration, real quick, I'll mention this is kind of my high horse for a second. Sometimes when I've done that, especially in multi-race wagers, I will do that when I'm playing against a favorite and playing a couple other horses. I actually did that with a very small pick 3 yesterday where I was playing against a favorite in one of the races, and I had, I think, the second choice and third choice in the start of a pick 3. And they scratched one of the two prior to the race. And before the sequence even started, and I ended up landing on the stupid favorite that I was playing against, and I wasn't even following along enough to realize to cancel the bet. That should never happen. Ever, 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 ever. And it's what makes me, I know we talked earlier about how tracks just want handle and everything, but that is the kind of thing that turns me off to doing multi-race wagers, especially if I'm not playing them and actively following up until post time, because
I agree.
It basically means I will not play another multi-race wager at Saratoga unless I'm watching every moment.
Yeah, I don't think that's a bad idea. I think it's economics, so it's not going to change. Let's start by saying that. But if all you cared about in the world was what was fair and right for the horse racing fan, the idea of going to the post-time favorite, it's just rotten. Maybe a better way of doing it, and I'm sure it's a tote system problem, and there's probably not enough support for this opinion to get it done, but would be to allow you, like in a handicapping contest, a backup pick. Where if you want to beat that favorite, at least you could get that. Personally, I'd love to see it be refunded if there was a way to do that.
They do that in
its own problems, but
they do that in other jurisdictions, and they do that with the double, right?
Yeah, I had it explained to me once. I think it's partially a technology issue, but really I think it's racetracks wanting to make more money issue.
I think you're right. It's the second point, and and if I instead was playing exactas or trifectas or whatever, they can figure out the math to refund the scratched horse. I don't end up landing on the favorite in those situations. So I think it's.
Let's underline something you said before for people who might not know what you were talking about. I love what you said about win betting using conditional wagers. I have never done that on DRF bets. Is that definitely a feature that is available there?
It absolutely is. What you can do is you go in, you say, I want to do a win bet on this horse, and you enter in what odds you want, and you enter in the odds at minutes to post. So I could say at 0 minutes to post, if I'm getting at least 10-1, submit my bet. If I don't get the 10-1, it doesn't submit. The problem there, of course, it's not perfect, but the problem there is oftentimes, especially in certain jurisdictions, it will go off 4 or 5 minutes after post time. And so it'll be 0 minutes to post, and they're still taking bets for 4 or 5 minutes. And so it might be officially 0 minutes to post, and you're getting your 7-2 or 9-2, and then the horse gets hammered down to 6-5.
But the longer odds you're playing, the less danger of that there is happening, probably. So a lot of these horses you come up with are pretty square numbers. So I think it's a great thing. It's a great way. It's a great thing to try if you can't be there monitoring it yourself and you want to have action. I definitely recommend folks having a look at that.
It's a perfect example yesterday, and I was working from home a little bit. My wife was off on vacation, so I wasn't really following along, but there was a Chad Brown horse, a maiden, who was going turf to dirt, 6-1 or 8-1 morning line, and I was like, okay, this horse is a square price on the morning line, opens at like 6-5, and I think went off at 8-5 or something like that. So clearly the morning line was a little generous, shall we say. But that would be a perfect example of something like a conditional wager, where earlier in the day, if I'd seen it and said, okay, if I'm getting at least 4-1, I'll put it in, go and do my business, and, I see later the horse is 8-5. Whether he loses or wins, I don't want to play at 8-5, and I wouldn't have had to.
Yeah, it can definitely, on the year, if you can get that kind of extra edge and not waste those bets on the shorties. Yeah, sometimes they win, but that's not what you're making. That's not what you're playing a horse like that for. So this is just another tool in the betting universe that can help you get a little bit the best of it, and something for players to check out to avoid some of those other pitfalls.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, I think we're just about done with the podcast today. It was a fun one. I think it's the first time that you and I have done it alone remotely.
Well, we did that one, if folks, and apologies to folks who had to bear with that one. Remember, there was one in the Triple Crown season where I just recorded the whole thing on my phone, and we had some tech, but we did post it, and I think we gave a winner or two during that one, so folks were okay with the tech problems. How did the technology hold up on my side? I can't really tell here. Have you been able to hear and see me the whole time?
I've been able to hear and see you the whole time. The only thing we've had is a couple hitches where it will hang on your video for about 3 or 4 seconds, and then the audio will come, and then the video will catch up. Yeah, so I don't know. We'll figure it out. At least it's better. You don't black out. You don't go completely out of the view. So
before we leave.
Go ahead.
Yeah, we'll get there soon. Before we leave, let's tell folks about this webinar we're doing this week.
Yeah, I wanted to mention that. I'm really excited about this. It's Thursday. It's part of the ongoing series that we've been doing. We did one last week on trainer stats that a lot of really good feedback on. I think people really liked. The one this Thursday is on Moss pace figures, and I'm really excited because we're able to get Randy Moss himself to talk about how to use them, how to use Formulator to access them, the types of races that you want to be focusing on for them. You bring your questions. It's 11:30 Thursday morning Eastern Time. You, me, and Randy Moss should be fantastic.
I can't wait. Randy's one of the sharper and more sort of savvy guys out there. He's been somebody I've admired for a long time. Never gotten to work with him other than him very kindly giving a quote for a book I worked on years ago called 6 Secrets of Successful Bettors. I'm really looking forward to this too. It's going to be a lot of fun. You got anything else before I send us home here?
That's it. That's the big one.
Until the next time, folks, may you win all your photos.